Hi students, welcome to lesson 25, Liberal and Marxist Perspective. Liberalism as a perspective of development has to be understood in a broader framework in terms of its economic, political and social meanings. The modern day political ideologies and economic and social policies primarily flow from the liberal perspective. Historically, liberalism has been put to use for the unhindered growth of capitalist economy and the capitalist social order. Marxist perspective, on the other hand, opines that capitalism, owing to its disturbed equilibrium, will lead to communism. Objectives. After completion of this lesson, you will be able to develop a basic understanding of liberal and Marxist perspective of development. Let us begin our discussion with liberal perspective of development. Liberal perspective has provided a distinct perspective on social, economic and political development. It set out an ideology that has shaped history and in recent times has made a major comeback in the form of neoliberalism to influence the future course of human development. The philosophical foundation of classical liberalism was shaped in the writings of David Hume, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. These thinkers constructed the social contract theory based on the idea that human beings are guided by enlightened self-interest, rationality, free choice and the idea of free development of the individual self in a free atmosphere with minimum of state control. According to 𝗕𝗏𝗺, liberalism never constituted a unified and consistent doctrine. It has rather been an amalgam of different doctrines including the Red Start, the defense of individual freedom and basic rights, the recognition of pluralism, representative government, the separation of powers, the limitation of the role of state, rationalistic individualism and capitalist market economy. Liberal perspective is based on the economic doctrine of laissez-faire, which means free promotion of entrepreneurship in production and trade and in social and political doctrines of liberty and democracy. Liberal perspective believed that doing away with political and economic constraints on individual behavior would lead to moral improvement throughout society. Individual liberation, according to this viewpoint, is the key to social progress. Individuals who lead a free and independent existence are likely to acquire virtues such as self-reliance, prudence, tolerance and respect for the right of others. These virtues are often described as bourgeoisie since they are typically displayed by economically successful groups in capitalist society. Liberal perspective has been allied with the progress of the capitalist world. Its subscribers seek to remove restraints upon the capacity of individuals to participate in economic competition. Liberalists have argued that the economic independence associated with capitalist regimes also breeds a sense of moral independence. Liberal perspective supports a process of embourgeoisement in which everyone will eventually adopt attitudes compatible with a competitive economy. The history of liberalism reveals a succession of strategies to extend rights which it is judged will secure the economic and moral independence of individuals. The different versions of liberalism foresee a one-class society consisting of self-governing citizens. The liberal ideal of a community is where, despite inequalities of wealth, self-discipline and mutual respect are upheld. Among the liberal thinkers, 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 and Max Weber are prominent names. At the invitation of the Carnegie Corporation, Swedish economist 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 explored the social and economic problems of African Americans in 1938 and 1940 and wrote an American dilemma, The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy, in 1944. In this work, 𝗦𝗔𝗧 presented his theory of cumulative causation, that is, of poverty creating poverty. Circular cumulative causation is a theory developed by 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 in the year 1956. It is a multi-causal approach where the core variables and their linkages are delineated. The idea behind it is that a change in one form of an institution will lead to successive changes in other institutions. These changes are circular in that they continue in a cycle, many times in a negative way in which there is no end, and cumulative in that they persist in each round. The change does not occur all at once, as that would lead to chaos. Rather, the changes occur gradually. In 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧's analysis, the growth in progressive or advancing regions affects the growth in lagging or depressed regions through first process, spread effects, and second one, the backwash effects. The spread effects are the centrifugal forces of expansionary momentum emanating from the centers of economic expansion to another region. Thus, the spread effects have a positive impact on the development of another region. Because of growth in the progressive region, on one hand, demand for agricultural products and raw material from other regions is increased, and on the other, advanced technology is made available to lagging regions which they did not formerly possess. On account of these two factors, growth in other regions is promoted. In contrast to the spread effect, the backwash effects are those effects emanating from the center of growth that discourage growth in other area. Because of their rapid growth in contrast to the stagnation of other regions, the centers of growth or progressive regions attract net immigration from other parts of the country. There is a net movement of population, capital and goods in favor of the progressive regions, while the backward regions are continually denuded. Since the migration from backward regions to progressive regions is generally selective in the sense, it means the young, the educated and the healthy that migrate, the age structure in the lagging regions becomes lopsided. All these factors have an adverse effect on the growth of backward regions. The book Asian Drama, An Inquiry into Poverty of Nations, 1968, written by 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧, represents a 10-year study of poverty in Asia. Whereas 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 was a Malthusian who thought that population growth in Asia would stunt economic growth, conditions in the early 21st century show that many Asian countries have experienced both population growth and high economic growth. 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 began work on Asian drama in 1957, more than 10 years before its publication. The worldview of the time is well captured by something he wrote in 1957. There is a small group of countries which are quite well off and a much larger group of extremely poor countries, that the countries in the former group are on the whole firmly settled in a pattern of continuing economic development, while in the latter group progress is slower, as many countries are in constant danger of not being able to lift themselves out of stagnation or even of losing ground so far as average income levels are concerned, and that therefore on the whole in recent decades the economic inequalities between developed and developing countries have been increasing. If development is to occur in South Asian countries, it will come not as a response to foreign demand for the products in which the region has traditionally had a comparative advantage. Development must be internally based and deliberately prodded and nurtured, since the spontaneous growth inducing stimulus of a relatively free and expanding international trade is no longer present. In Max Weber's perspective, rationalization is an important element in the process of development. The rationalization process is the practical application of knowledge to achieve a desired end. It leads to efficiency, coordination and control over both physical and social environment. It is a product of scientific specialization and technical differentiation that seems to be a characteristic of Western culture. It is the guiding principle behind bureaucracy and the increasing division of labor. It has led to unprecedented increase in both production and distribution of goods and services. It is also associated with secularization, depersonalization and oppressive routine. Increasingly, human behavior is guided by observation, experiment and reason, to which he uses the term 𝗓-rational to master the natural and social environment to achieve a desired end. Weber's general theory of rationalization, of which bureaucratization is but a particular case, refers to increasing human mastery over the natural and social environment. In turn, these changes in social structure have changed human character through changing values, philosophies and beliefs. Bureaucracy and rationalization were rapidly replacing all other forms of organization and thought. Rationalization is the most general element of Weber's theory. He identifies rationalization with an increasing division of labor, bureaucracy and mechanization. Weber pointed out that modern capitalism requires rational, calculated procedures in a methodical attempt to accumulate money, and it should reinvest to earn yet more capital. Modern capitalism emerged by the religious ethic of Protestantism and particularly of Calvinism. Weber observed that capitalism was growing very fast in the West. He felt that capitalism of the Western type was growing more in Protestant society than in others. Unlike other forms of economy, for capitalism to work, capital has to be accumulated, not to be consumed, but to be reinvested in the pursuit of ever more efficient and profitable techniques of production. The more wealth is made and more successful the capable enterprise is, the more resources are available to improve the efficiency of production. Work is therefore an end in itself. Profit to be reinvested is virtuous and brings its own reward. Weber established a correlation between a religious way of thinking in the world and an attitude towards economic activity. Weber argued other religions did not provide the same incentive for this kind of social and economic change. Weber undertook a massive study of the major world religious system, for example, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Islam that inhibit the growth of a rational economic system. Let us now discuss about the Marxian perspective of development. Karl Marx's major concerns were the development of human society through various stages, development and change in the material condition. He was also interested in the development of capitalism and the corresponding change in the class relationship and transformation in mode of production were the major concerns of Karl Marx. Historical materialism. Marx's theory of history is centered around the idea that forms of society rise and fall as they further and then impede the development of human productive power. Marx sees the historical process as proceeding through a necessary series of modes of production characterized by class struggle culminating in communism. Marx's economic analysis of capitalism is based on his version of labor theory of value and includes the analysis of capitalist profit as the extraction of surplus value from the exploited proletariat or working class. The analysis of history and economics come together in Marx's prediction of inevitable economic breakdown of capitalism to be replaced by communism, contradictions inbuilt in the material condition of existence. Marx's idea of development is best understood in terms of his analysis and interpretation of the capitalist society, its evolution, structure and functioning. Marx has presented his ideas through his writings like Communist Manifesto in 1848, in the preface to a contribution to the critique of political economy, and the Capital have discussed these ideas. According to Karl Marx, all the legal relations, politics, forms of the states are to be understood. In the social production of their life, men enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will, relations of production which correspond to a definite stage of development of their material productive forces. The sum total of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which rises a legal and political superstructure and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material life conditions the social, political and intellectual life process in general. He was very categorical to mention that with the change in the economic foundation, the inter-superstructure, that is the legal, political, religious, aesthetic or philosophical, get transferred. In the process of such transformation, individual consciousness is determined not by what he thinks, but by the contradiction of material life, that is the conflict between social productive forces and relation of production. Consciousness is a part of development in human society. For Marx, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but on the contrary, their material condition of existence that determines this consciousness. Classes for Marx are formed based on objective material conditions. These are groups of people with a common economic position, that is those of other class. In essence, this economic interest is conflicting and contradictory to each other's class position. These class relations get transformed to hostile action against each other with the intermediation of class consciousness. The objective material conditions form the basis for the formation of class in itself, which get transformed into class for itself in the process of transversing of subjective class consciousness. To Karl Marx, though the class relation was very complicated in the earlier epochs of history, in the modern stage of capitalism, this has been simplified. In the modern capitalist society, new classes, however, have emerged with new condition of operation and new form of struggle between the bourgeoisie, that is the owners of the production and the haves, and proletariat, that is the have-nots. In Marx theory, division of labor is an important concept. Through the development of technology, human beings were able to improve agriculture and could form settled communities. As production grew, the community produced more than its requirements. There was surplus. It was now possible to support people who were not directly involved in the production of food. Once there was surplus, it was possible for people to diversify their activities. Hence, some produced food which was sufficient to feed all, while others were engaged in other activities. This is called division of labor. This system led in some people gaining control over the means of production by excluding others. Thus, property which was held by all came under the control of only some members, giving rise to notion of private property. Hence, now the interests of all people were no longer common. There were differences in the interests. Thus, the interest of the individuals became different from the interests of the community. Marx stated that division of labor and private property is identical expressions. It implied the contradictions between the individual and communal interests. These differences which occur in human society, which are due to the existence of private property, led to formation of classes which form the basis of social stratification. In all stratified societies, there are two major groups, a ruling class and a subject class. The ruling class exploits the subject class. As a result, there is a basic conflict of interest between these two classes. Marx further stated in his work, Contributions of the Critique of Political Economy, that the various institutions of society such as legal and political systems, religion, are the instruments of ruling class domination and serve to further its interests. Class. Marx used the term class to refer to two main strata in all stratification systems. There are two major social groups in all stratified societies, and as I mentioned, a ruling class and a subject class. The ruling class derives its power through its control over the means of production. It is thus able to appropriate the labor of another class. In 1852 published article by Karl Marx, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, Marx describes class in this way. Insofar as millions of families live under economic conditions of existence that separate their mode of life, their interests and their culture from those of other classes and put them in a hostile opposition to the latter, they form a class. From Marx's perspective, systems of stratification derive from the relationships of social groups to the forces of production. Marx used the term class to refer to these main strata in all stratification systems, and class comprises two major groups. One which controls the means of production is able to appropriate the labor of the other class due to specific position it occupies in the social economy. Hence, a class is a social group whose members share the same relationship to the forces of production. This in fact distinguishes one class from the other. These are in opposition to one another. At the same time, there is a relationship of dependence between the classes. If one class can appropriate the labor of another class because of its control over the means of production, it means that the two classes are dependent on each other, but they are also opposed to each other. The dialectics, that is tensions, conflict and interaction of class, therefore is a result of combination of dependence and opposition. The relationship between classes is dynamic relationship which results in social change. This is why classes are central to Marx's approach to social transformation. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx writes, "Hitherto, the history of all societies is the history of class struggle." In other words, changes in the history of mankind are caused by the conflict of classes. Class conflict is hence the engine of social change. With reference to growth of class, development of society is through the process of class conflict. The domination of one class over the other leads to conflict. Alongside, the production process also develops due to changes in the technology resulting in its improvement. This leads to changes in the class structure as classes become obsolete or outdated with increase in production techniques. New classes are then formed, replacing the old classes. This leads to further class conflict. Marx believed that the Western societies had developed through four main stages or epochs. What are these four stages? Primitive communism, which is represented by the societies of prehistory. Those societies which are dependent on hunting and gathering and which have no division of labor. From then onwards, all societies are divided into two major classes: masters and slaves in ancient society, landlords and serfs in feudal society, capitalist or bourgeoisie and labor class or proletariat in capitalist society. During each historical epoch, the labor power required for production was supplied by the subject class, that is, by slaves, serfs and labor class respectively. The ruling class exploits and oppresses the subject class. Since the ruling class is economically powerful, they also become legally and politically powerful. Despite the fact that these classes are dependent on one another, the relationship is that of exploiter and exploited. With reference to the basic characteristics of capitalist society, capital may be defined as money used to finance the production of commodities for private gain. Capitalism therefore involves the investment of capital in the production of commodities with the aim of maximizing profit. Marx argued that capital as such produces nothing, only labor produces wealth. Yet, the wages paid to the workers are well below the value of goods they produce. The difference between the value of wages and commodities is called as surplus value. This surplus value is used by the capitalists as profits. The political power is derived from economic power. Therefore, the major institutions, values, belief systems are seen to be largely shaped by economic relations. The power of ruling class therefore stems from its ownership and control of the forces of production. With reference to class and social change, these conditions lead to the proletariats developing into class for itself. What is class for itself? It is a class having class consciousness and class solidarity. The basic contradictions contained in a capitalist economic system would lead to its eventual destruction. Capitalist society in itself is very unstable. Increasing use of machinery will result in a homogeneous working class, since the increased use of machinery shall remove the differences in skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled workers. The differences in wealth between the bourgeoisie and proletariat will increase. Even if the real wages and living standards of proletariats or working class may increase, its members will become poor in relation to the bourgeoisie or capitalist class. This process is called as pauperization. Intense competition will depress the intermediate strata and it will sink into the proletariat. This will increase the economic distance between the two stratas, leading to polarization of the classes. The polarization of classes into opposite groups is a result of class consciousness. Only when a class is aware of its opposition to another class, it is conscious of its being. Only when class consciousness develops, there develops class relations and they become dynamic, that is, they change. Without class consciousness, the working is merely in relation to capital. It is a class in itself. What is class in itself? It is social group whose members share the same relation to the forces of production. In his work, The Poverty of Philosophy, Marx observes that the working class which exists in this manner is only a mass of individuals and is mere class in itself. When it unites in its struggle against capital, it forms itself into a class for itself, that is, class having class consciousness and class solidarity. The interest it defends becomes class interest. Once the class attains solidarity and becomes aware of its consciousness, it leads to class revolution, followed by a brief period of proletariat domination. However, even this is a temporary phase and human society shall finally herald into communist stage. Hence, in Marxist framework, we find that class is a dynamic unit. It may be subject to change with the advancement of technology, but the basis for its formulation remains the same. Class forms the basis of the stratification system in any society. Classes are related to the production process of each society. Changes in class structure occur when there are changes in the production process. Friends, now let us sum up this lesson. In this lesson, we have discussed about liberal perspective and Marxian perspective on development, which offer varied explanations with regard to the process and indicators of development. On one hand, liberal perspective talks about laissez-faire, and on the other, Marxian perspective delves into class and means of production in explaining development. Thank you.